Oh, okay. So now we have to be.
Now the pressure's on.
There you go.
Well, first of all, I would like to introduce Dr. Charlotte Patterson. She's a professor of psychology at the University of Virginia. Her research explores the role of sexual orientation in human development and family life, and is best known for her studies of child development in lesbian and gay parented families. She has won multiple awards, including a Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from APA Division 44, an Outstanding Achievement Award from the APA Committee on LGBTQ Concerns, and a Distinguished Contribution to Research in Public Policy Award from APA. She was a member of the U.S. Institute of Medicine Committee on LGBT Health Issues and Research Gaps. Their influential report was published by the National Academic Press in 2011. Last year, Patterson co-chaired a U.S. National Academies of Science, Engineering, and Medicine Committee on understanding the status of well-being of sexual and gender minority populations. The report was issued in October 2020. This is an honor for me. It's one of the researchers that I admire the most, and her ideas and research has been super influential to me in a personal and a professional level. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Having said that, well, we are here to discuss certain things that you stated on your session for sexual orientation and family lives. This happened on the SRCD biennial event. So I don't know, I would like to start asking you something that was very interesting when I saw your presentation. And you said like the words childless or child-free like could be exchangeable and people could just pick one of them. I would like to semi-force you to pick one, or for you to explain to us why, what are the differences, or why you would rather use one or the other concept.
Oh, Fernando, thank you for this lovely introduction. And of course, you know that I'm a great fan of your work as well. And so it's a pleasure to get a chance to chat. Yes, you know, when we talk about the desire to have children, sometimes sometimes people understand us as saying that everyone must have children or we aren't complete human beings, you know, that sort of thing. And that's the last thing I want to convey to people. I really want to urge that everyone, gay and straight, you know, cisgender or transgender, ought to have the opportunity to make their own decisions and live the life that they envision and they want. And for gay people, of course, for many years, as we all know, it was forbidden really to have children. It couldn't be imagined, it couldn't be conceived. I have a cartoon that I love from the New Yorker magazine. It's quite a few years old, but I think it's still appropriate, where a gay couple sits at a cocktail table with another couple and with a heterosexual couple, and they're saying, oh, we're an old-fashioned gay couple, you know, no kids. You know, and I think for such a long time, people felt they couldn't have children. And I know many gay men in my generation, less so women, but we'll come to that. But I think many gay men in my generation certainly thought it was just impossible, couldn't do it, wouldn't even consider it. And I have a number of personal friends who I thought would have been just wonderful parents, and would have loved being parents, who would simply not think it possible. And of course, women felt that way too much. You know, many people in my generation in the gay community thought that as well, I think. And had things been different, might have gone a different way. And of course, times have changed now, and many It's a normal question to ask a gay couple as they're getting married. So when are you having children? Here in the U.S., I think just as it is for heterosexual people. So it's wonderful, and I think having those opportunities to ask those questions is what I'm about, and not necessarily dictating any answers to them, any particular answers. Um, People know, and it's true that I myself have, my wife and I have three children. They're young adults now. That's a decision we've made, and I've been thrilled to have this opportunity to uh, um, have this family and live and grow with them. But I think it's not right for everyone, and I don't in any way want to push that onto anyone. So child-free versus childless is a set of terms that seems like they have a different resonance. And I like anyone to use any term that they want in this case. But I'm curious also, Fernando, how you hear those terms. When I hear child less, somehow to me it sounds like, well, that your life was less than you wanted it to be, child less. Oh, I wanted to have children and I couldn't somehow. Whereas child free is like a choice I made. I don't want to do this, I want to do that. I'm going to focus on this other part of my life. And so I hear them as having different resonances, but I'm not sure whether others do today or not. So I'm curious, Fernando, do you have a feeling about these terms?
Interesting question. I understand both of them as you just stated. Like, I think
Yes.
like free gives you an option, but I don't think, and this is where I don't know if it's a waste of time. I don't think so. Well, sometimes it does. But when I spend so much time thinking about words and I don't like either of them, I haven't come
Right.
with a better solution. Okay, so this is it. And this we can start thinking together about one. But also child free to me has this very like individualistic part where you have a weight, like lifted. And I don't like it either. I like it better probably, but yeah, I don't know. I don't like neither of them.
Yeah, yeah, I
Yes.
don't either. And as like you, I have no better words to offer. I'd like to think about that, and maybe one of our students will come up with a better view. you know. But
Childless has a sad feeling to it, doesn't it? It's like that there's somebody was like you said that they wanted to but then couldn't. So
right,
yeah, I
right.
agree. I agree.
It's interesting. I'm not sure if you would have seen it because literally there's a paper that came out yesterday that was written by Rachel Farr, my former student, and one of her grad students. Simon is the last name. I think it's K. Simon, one of her grads. So it's Simon and Farr. Came out yesterday in one of the journals. I don't recall which one. I'll get it for you if you're interested. But they're developing a scale for what they think of as ambiguous loss of gay people who, I say gay, what I really mean is queer, the whole umbrella. Queer
Right.
people who might have wanted children and didn't have children, and how did they think about that? Do they think of it as a loss and so forth, which I think is very interesting. Because, my experience with, some people choose to be single, let's say, and not partnered and not having children and so forth. And that's the life they want. And they would score very low on this scale. And then other people might have had, problems or difficulties in having the life they wanted in one way or another. And that's what I think a lot of our research is about. The problems that people have faced and are overcoming, as you are showing, for example,
Hmm.
in your work. So this new piece by Simon and Farr, I think is going to be really interesting because it's a scale, and they use the term ambiguous loss, that Pauline Boss has pioneered, and it's the idea that there's a loss, but it's kind of about a non-event. So not having children can be viewed as a loss, but it isn't normally viewed that way, I don't think, quite. It's a non-event. It's not like a relative died. it's that there wasn't that relative in that spot in your life, kind of thing. So it's in that sense an ambiguous loss they're claiming. And I think that's real interesting. I'd like to know more about that. And I think particularly as people grow older, they begin to think differently about these issues than they might have when they were young adults. And I think that's interesting too. There's a developmental, possibly developmental, or maybe just experiential change over time. So I wish that we had a better term, Fernando. Would
Yeah.
that be great?
Well, but as you said, this is very, what I really like is that this field is growing and growing. And each time, like all of you guys have brilliant students that are like your last session with Meg Bishop. I think the work is amazing. Like there is young people doing like very cool stuff, and we are going to learn and hear better terms probably, and different populations. And this is one of the other questions that I had. Like you and me have been working mostly with LG people, right? Or LGB people. What do we know about other identities, expressions, and orientations? What do we know about parenting desires and expectations with the other side of the umbrella?
Such a good question, I think. People are working on it, of course, as you know. And you're one of them, which is great. The plurisexual people that you've studied. I call them bisexual. Is that different to you? Do you use plurisexual differently than bisexual?
Yes, and this was from an American researcher that is called Paz Galupo, I think.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, well, of course you know everyone.
No,
I
but
really no, well, but I really like her division. Like she said, like, well, let's try to keep monosexuals and plurisexuals, so the umbrella doesn't go like that wide. So having monosexuals and gay and bisexual and pansexuals, she proposed bisexuals, queers, and pansexuals, I think. Yeah. So we
I
try
see.
to use the
I see.
same, well, her proposals, and this is how we made the division. So yeah.
Thank you. So that's helpful. Yeah, I wasn't thinking of it in her terms, and I was wondering if that's how you meant it. Yes. So you're doing some of this work, which is great, and I know others are too. Samantha Tornello, for example, has been working with, I think, Henny Bose, um, doing some work with transgender folks and their issues and desires and so forth. And of course, we say transgender folks as though that's a unitary group, but of course it's not. And many of them have had kids before transitioning, or want to have kids after transitioning, and they're going one direction or another, or they may not fully identify with either and be simply non-binary, or there's a lot of diversity there as well. And so I'm proud of her work in that area. I think that's great. And I think many others too. Um, you may have heard at SRCD Phil Hammock's talk. Did you? He gave an interesting talk about how many young people are identifying using different kinds of terms than we have historically used in this area, and inventing new terms all the time. And I love that idea too, for identities. And I think there are really important questions about that and how it will affect people's family lives. I sometimes hear younger people, younger than myself, talking about, and usually students talking about how they don't really want to think about, they want to think about the flexibility that's involved. They don't want to think about identities as fixed. And of course, we all know that we can have flexibility, and that many of us do. I have a long standing joke with a very close friend of mine that I'm an ex-heterosexual and she's an ex-lesbian. I mean, we all change, kind of thing over time in ways that sometimes feel very unexpected, sometimes are maybe not so unexpected. But when we think about those changes, the question is, how does that affect or not our family lives. So, I think it's really interesting as people transition, relationships are challenged, you know, uh, a heterosexual couple, one person is transitioning, the other one may say, but I'm not a lesbian. I don't want, if you turn into a woman, I don't want to be involved with another woman, I'm not, et cetera, that kind of thing. It's a challenge, to the relationship. And some relationships hold up through that. Um, and others maybe not so much, but how we think about family lives and childbearing in the context of that kind of fluidity is really an interesting question, I think. Um, and the kids, I think, are far less bothered by it than the adults in general. This is my experience. I once interviewed a family, which I believed when I walked in the front door to be a lesbian couple and their children. And I guess it was actually, but as the parents had to do something in the other room as we were chatting, and I don't know, the phone rang or something, and I ended up chatting with the children instead. And one of the kids said in this very offhanded way, "Oh, my other mom used to be my dad, but now she's my mom after she's transitioned." This is a kid who was like, I don't know, 9 or something like that. And I was shocked by how calm and it was kind of like saying, "Oh, the people down the block drive a Ford." It was nothing. And of course, the adults around them saw it as very, and I was a little shocked at the time. This was a zillion years ago. I'd never had any kids say that to me about their family before. And I was surprised. And these things are going to happen. And I think that's quite valuable and interesting, for us to take into account. So I'm really interested in the other part of the umbrella too, Fernando. I think it's up to people your age to really tell us about it, though. I think that as all these identities proliferate, we need to know more about that. And what does that mean?
Totally. And I agree. And I would like to share with you guys a Mexican colleague, Jimena de Garay, did her PhD in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, right?
Brazil.
And she had an experience just like the one you just described. And I'm going with this. Sorry, I'm of course super nervous with this conversation. So sorry with my English and my proficiency. But sometimes this leads us back to language. Why I'm saying this? She thought she was studying a lesbian couple, and then something like what you described happened. And then you see, for example, this is my reflection, how English and Portuguese help naming that, because when she was interviewing the kid, the vignette, it's called Gabi, right? Gabi told her like, well, she was my dad, but now she wants us to call her mom. So sometimes I get confused, but I just love her. And when I'm lost, I go by, hey, you guy. In Portuguese, you would go você. Y você, it's gender neutral. You would call você everyone, to everybody. So you have like it also challenges how we name things. And I think now that I am learning and in English, many things, well, the use of the pronouns, right? And the they, them, theirs. In Portuguese, it's easy. In Spanish, it's such a battle, right? Like, how are we naming this? Because there are a lot of folks that do not identify with that binary, and like the barrier. This leads me to reflect on language too. I don't know if that has happened to you too, Doctor.
Oh yes, totally. I think the point you're raising is so important. I mean, in French, even tables have gender, I mean, tables and chairs, and they don't need it, it's crazy, right? But it of course reflects our history, and as language does, So I think one of the things that we can do as academics is invent new language, and of course it's not easy. But I think what your story points to is really important, and that we don't have to speak the way that we do. We can create a language that we haven't had if we speak it together enough and convince others to join us. But maybe the
Completely.
young people will do that for us,
Hmm,
right?
hmm,
In other words, I don't mean to say that you're old. I mean that when I say young people, I mean kids, students who are still in school.
hmm,
The youngsters will think of new stuff, and that
hmm,
we will benefit from that, all of us,
hmm, hmm,
Um,
totally.
and that's one thing. And then the other thing is that as we live differently, we're kind of forced to, in a way, aren't we? Um, so the perennial thing that children always hear in lesbian mother families is where you have a lesbian couple who are your parents. The kids always hear, that standard question. I'm sure you've heard it too. How do you figure out what to call them? Kind of thing. I mean, it's a tedious thing that every kid I've ever known who lived in a family like that has heard, and kind of hates the question because it's just so tedious, you know. And they all say things like, well, you know, and then they tell you, how they do it. It's mommy and mama, or it's, I call them hey you, or, whatever. Um, at our house, sometimes it was mom, and then, you'd answer because you'd hear it, and you'd say yes, and say no, the other one. you know, Same idea, but you can get it across. But we don't have that language so well, I think. And should we? I don't know. That's a really interesting question, I think.
Hmm,
Different ways of living, though. You know, uh, the linguistic philosophers have examined this for years. If you think about Wittgenstein's work and so forth, it's all about, how different ways of living create different languages. And as we live less gendered lives, which I think we are doing in the Western cultures at least, as we live somewhat less gendered lives, perhaps we can generate somewhat less gendered languages. Wouldn't that be something? Um, an interesting question I think that you have to entertain if you go in that direction is, what will ever happen to a gay identity if gender is not super important? You know? We'll all be pansexual or something like that, or plurisexual at least,
huh, huh,
or
huh,
asexual, I guess is the other alternative.
of
But
course.
it's a very important, I think what you raise is really important, Fernando.
Hmm, hmm,
And you in particular, I think because you're forced to span different linguistic communities in your life, are sensitive to that. And I think one of the virtues of our really quite international field is
hmm,
that you're not alone in that. There are so many others who also have that. They have examples in their head from their own languages that
hmm,
perhaps, I'm a native English speaker who has uh, barely learned any other languages at all.
hmm,
I credit myself too much to say that I speak a little Spanish. It's very tiny, a little
uh-huh,
French, very tiny, and so forth. Um, and struggle. I can read Portuguese better than I can understand it out loud.
hmm,
Because it looks a little like Spanish, as you know, obviously. Uh, but for me, those examples don't come readily to mind from other languages. Whereas I think for you, it's an advantage, and I hope for your colleagues from, we have colleagues now from all over the world who study these things.
hmm.
That will be an interesting question.
Totally, totally. I completely agree. But I do think that at least me speaking Spanish, Portuguese, and English and Portuguese make it easier. In Spanish, it's very complicated because it's as what you said with French, like everything has a gender. So it's very hard to get out of that. And in parenting, well, it goes worse because, of course, if you're a woman, you immediately desire to have children and you need to. And if not, you're less of a woman or a childless, or you're not complete. And as you said earlier, I don't know if we were recording or not by then, but it's just about having, and this is where we agree. And sometimes I feel this is where our work wants to be important in terms of informing that people should have the option. And those who want to go, and you go, girl. And if not, well, keep the kind of life that you want, right? So I think this is why we do what we do. What I would like to know, Charlotte, is if, well, you are an expert in the field, and you have been describing for the last couple of years parenting aspirations and expectations. And what you presented is that there is an a difference between what I want and what I think that I can achieve, right? Well, I'm making a terrible abstract of your research, but I'm trying my best. The question is, I would like to know if, like another variable or as a plus, you know, or you can tell us about not only the aspiration and or the expectation, but the chosen path. That is, if LGBTQ, etc. folks prefer adoption, foster, parenting, reproductive technologies, if you can share with us some about that.
The pathway, yes. So this is a big question for those of us who are interested in all of this in the queer community, because it's not as obvious as it is for other people, you know. um, so of course, we've been working on that, and I know others have been as well, Fernando. The question of adoption versus surrogacy versus foster care versus uh, donor insemination versus many other, you know, pathways and informal pathways as well. I think we've paid less attention to some of the informal pathways that than we should. But yes, I think that lots of queer people are really open to adoption. Many more of us than are in the heterosexual community at large, in part necessity, but I think also for ideological reasons. We think of many thousands of children who really need homes, and we want to create a home. Then it seems like a natural match for foster care and adoption, foster adopt situation. And I think that the figures in the United States at least bear that out, you know, that we're far more likely to be foster and adoptive parents than heterosexual adults are. And then others of us, particularly, of course, in the lesbian community, are choosing donor insemination. Um, uh, we have advantages over the guys that way because we, you know, have wombs, right? You know, and even in, you know, a backup womb if needed, you know, in a couple. So that it gives us, you know, advantages. And of course, many men who can are choosing surrogacy. So that's a, you know, complicated set of you know, ART issues, you know, assisted reproductive technology. I call it ART, and um, and also financial. So it really leads to the question that I am somewhat preoccupied with actually at the moment, honestly, and that is um, who among us are the people who are becoming parents and why. I'm really wondering if this is a psychological question, as you might think of it in the heterosexual community. Are these people, for example, who are close to their parents and had a warm relationship with their mothers and fathers and want to become parents themselves? You know, that kind of thing, a psychological explanation? Or is the explanation really a better framed in more cultural terms around privilege, um, and position, status, resources, that kind of thing. Obviously, you know, surrogacy brings that to mind right away because it's so expensive. Um, and we know that lots and lots of gay men are becoming parents through, not necessarily couples are becoming parents through surrogacy. And we've had, you know, several celebrities recently in the US that have really brought that out, as you know, and you know, the Anderson Cooper story on the cover of every magazine and so forth has really brought that to the fore. And I'm sure he can afford all of that. But what does that do for a young man who might be struggling to get through school and find housing that he can afford and food on the table and so forth, who may not be able to do that? You know, so is it a story today? The question about becoming parents, is it a psychological story? Is it a cultural story about privilege? Is it, you know, and how can we first of all, what is the right way to frame this is one of the questions that I'm quite preoccupied with right now. And is it just those of us who have privileges of various sorts? We, had education, we have, jobs, we, that kind of thing, or is there more to it? And in either case, what can we do to make these opportunities equally available to everyone? Is one of the questions that I think our group of researchers and scholars, ought to be asking. I think it's really important. And the pathway question is really tied up in that. Because of course, some pathways are really inexpensive. We could have sex with an opposite sex partner and have children, right? And that's not very expensive, probably, right? A nice dinner or whatever, it's like you could imagine a few glasses of wine with that, and that would be, pretty inexpensive way relative to ART. Um, so, the choice of pathway must be determined by our resources. It has to be, because there's a ceiling on the resources that many of us have available. So I'm very concerned with all of that, but I'm somewhat uncertain about how to approach it best. And I'd love to hear your thoughts about it, Fernando.
Oof, we have to work together without being recorded from now on. I mean, no, but I completely agree. Like, I do think that those questions need to be addressed. And to me, since I tried, let's see again, this language thing, it's very interesting this day. Of
Important.
course, again, I'm nervous, but also like reflecting on it. And when I say in Spanish, I would say that I am a man that tried to deconstruct himself from different feminisms. That's the kind of definition I try to use for myself, because, well, there is this whole thing if men can or cannot be call themselves feminists. And to tell that I deconstructed myself, it's very ambitious and unrealistic, because I enjoy a lot of privilege, educated, white, even though I'm a Latinx and queer, I still have a lot of privilege just for the fact of being born with a penis. Many things having said there. So,
Professor.
well, exactly, and a professor. Having all those privileges, now I would like to do something. I don't know why, when, or how, but we're gonna do it together, Charlotte. But it's like how privilege it's obviously there, as you stated, because of course I see power and a lot of male power sometimes using poor female bodies, right? And that's a thing we need to address, and sometimes also to I would like not only to do research on, but actually to intervene. I don't know how yet, but to help specifically men, right? But I would say like all the queer folks about their privilege, because it's yes a thing about power, and also about what does a family mean? Why are we privileging biological bonds? We were talking before recording her Majesty and the researcher I admire the most, Mary Ainsworth herself. Like attachment bonds are co-constructed, right? So there is no need for a biological link. Of course, it's very cute to have a mini Fernando or a mini Charlotte or a mini Julia over there. But it's also to reflect, like, let's queer that also, what families and family bonds are. And that's something that I agree with every single thing that you said, and I think we need to reflect on.
And Fernando, I think we are doing that now. I don't mean you and me necessarily, but I do think that, we know that, for example, same-sex couples are far more likely to be interracial than heterosexual couples are. And so the adoptions that we seek out, of course, are often going to be interracial in one way or another, because if you have people representing two different, you can't match everything all the time, right? So we are more likely to adopt children of color, even if we're white, and certainly I'm sure many of us know people who have done that. There's many adoptions like that in the queer community. So I think it's going on already. I think the queer community is really pushing a few of those limits that have been historically in place around family membership. I mean, I live in the state of Virginia, which gave us the Supreme Court decision Loving v. Virginia in the United States, which was the first Supreme Court decision allowing interracial marriage in across all the states. And that was not very long ago, really. It was in the 60s, I think, the Loving v. Virginia decision. It was not very long ago. And many people who were in interracial relationships, heterosexual or otherwise, at that time literally moved out of state and moved west to be in more favorable climate as they saw it. And I know a number of people who did that. But in the queer community, this is happening all the time, interracial relationships. And so I think we are kind of queering some of those things already. And the question is, how is that going to, well, the queer community is always leading the world, culturally. What would the world do without us, right? So, I mean, I don't mean me personally or you, of course, better you than me, but I do think that this is another way in which that may be happening. And then the final way, I know we're probably running out of time, and you have a class to give, but the other way, of course, is that I think is what was I going to mention? Oh, there was something else in my mind about it I was going to mention, that we're doing this leading. Oh, yes. You're all constantly reading about how population changes are involving falling birth rates. Have you been reading about this? In Asia, there are concerns. In China, there are concerns that particularly about falling population replacement. That women aren't having enough babies and so forth. And here's the queer community leading the way. Please let us have children. I just love it.
Yeah.
Always somewhat against the current, right? And hopefully leading the way to a better world. Anyway, I look forward to many more chances to talk to you about these things, Fernando, when you're fully moved, all your boxes are in the United States, and you've settled in and had a chance to figure out your new neighborhood and so forth. Then I hope to have many more of these conversations.
Oh, it would be such an honor. Thank you so very much. It was my privilege not only to be here, but to be honoring my only child status, right? Like, you were all mine. And it was very good. So I enjoyed this very much, and share you bits and pieces with Anne and Julia. But thank you so much, Charlotte. This was.
May I foster or adopt?
Please, please. I'm visiting. Okay, so once I'm settled, I'm gonna go down to Virginia then.
Oh, that would be lovely. Or maybe I'll meet you in LA.
Okay, well, we can pick.
My home turf. This is where I grew up.
Oh,
Okay.
Okay, so we'll meet there, or in Mexico, or we visit Anne in Michigan, or
There we go.
Thank you very much, guys.
Wonderful to be with all of you, and thanks so much.
Thank you for taking this time. Much appreciated. Okay.
Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Take care. Ciao.